Hi, welcome to the Active Hope Show number 2. I'm Chris Johnston, co-author with Joanna Macy of Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. And this show is devoted to supporting inspired responses to concerns about the world. There's something I'd love to tell you about in this show. I've been invited to speak at a conference called The Psychology of Inspired Collective Climate Action and What Gets in Its Way. Happening just 2 weeks before the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Paris, this conference in London on November the 21st gathers a range of speakers looking at what I call the middle bit of change. There's the first bit of change is becoming aware of a problem, and the third bit of change is acting in response to that problem. The middle bit of change is all that happens between awareness and action, and it includes things like our belief that change is possible, it includes things like the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening, it includes the things that we plant in the landscape of our heart and mind. To draw out why this area is so important, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. And the first question is to do an assessment of how serious you think the problems that we're facing on planet Earth are right now. So I'm going to invite you to do this as a problemometer, a 0 to 10 scale, where 10 is the most catastrophic, difficult, ghastly problem you can imagine, and 0 is that there's no problem at all. So just for yourself, how do you rate this on a problemometer scale? Where would you put your dial on a 0 to 10 scale? I've done this rating scale with loads of different groups around the country when I've been giving talks around the UK. And everywhere I go, I see the same response, that on the whole, people are alarmed. That when on the problemometer scale, it's somewhere between about 7 and 9 is the average of the response that I get, that we are facing serious problems. So that then brings me to the second scale. The second scale is how well developed is our collective response. So 0 out of 10 is right over here, it's perhaps rather asleep to the problem. 10 out of 10 is a widespread, collective, inspired mobilisation. Really is about as well developed as you can imagine, or perhaps even more. So how do you rate our collective response on a 0 to 10 scale? Again, I've done this with large numbers of groups around the UK where I live, and every group that I've done this with, the response has tended to be around about 3 out of 10. So what we see here is a mismatch between the size of the problem and the size of the response. And that's really what this Active Hope Show is aimed at addressing, is how do we mobilise our response? How do we nourish, inspire, provoke our active, constructive responses to problems that are happening in our world, to our concerns about what's happening in our world? As Joanna Macy points out, none of the problems we face are as great as the deadening of our response. The activation of our response, the nourishing, energising, empowering and inspiring of our responses, that's a piece of work as important as anything else we can do, because it supports everything else we do. That's why we need to give our attention to the middle bit of change. That's where activation happens. There's the conference in Paris. There's a conference in London on the 21st of November, but also you can take part in your own conferences. What I mean by conferences is where we gather and we have conversations. And we gather and have conversations around what supports our inspired response. Because I'm going to ask you to do a third question, which is just to rate yourself on your own scale of a 0 to 10 response, is how well developed is your personal response to your concerns about what's happening in our world. I find for myself that my response fluctuates. Sometimes I do feel inspired and I am engaged in constructive responses, and there's other times I find it too much and I find that my own response might move to avoidance or distraction. And what I'm really interested in is how we nourish and feed our own responses. Because one of the most important influences on human behaviour is what we see others do. And if other people see you sharing your concerns, being open about your concerns, and actively addressing them, they're more likely to do this too. So inspired responses are contagious. So if you were to give your attention to the landscape of your heart and mind, noticing what encourages and inspires your response, as well as gets in its way, what's your psychology of inspired action? What helps you engage with other people so that you're part of a collective rather than just solo response? The title of that conference in London names something important. That there is a psychology of inspired collective climate action. It can happen through us, and we can learn to deal with whatever's in its way. I'm Chris Johnston. This is the Active Hope Show. We look forward to see you in the next edition. Bye.